name is Rachel Fernandez, and I'm going to be doing an informative speech on the constitutional and criminal law. Now, to start off, society constantly changes as trends and social norms evolve to fit the events that occur. Each year an event causes a change within society because there's a new aspect or perspective in emotion towards certain aspects of life. Now, the American criminal actually falls parallel with the events that evolve society. However, the law changes by the cases that are brought to them with new aspects that are usually not covered within the areas that the criminal justice system already has covered. These are considered as gray areas. Now, landmark cases changed the law and covered those gray areas, such as the Terry versus Ohio case that actually forced the Supreme Court to elaborate on the law within the Fourth Amendment. The criminal law has changed as new landmark cases are brought to the court, and that changes the law and how it's interpreted. While the current state of law is now reflecting the clear intent of those cases and the law, as well as the originally stated definition in the Constitution. So, the criminal law. The first 10 amendments of the U.S. Constitution guarantees the fundamental individual rights, and the first 8 amendments contain several guarantees of individual rights, which both including procedural safeguards and listing specific individual liberties that the government may not interfere without cause at all, says Garland in 2018. Now, the Fourth Amendment, as I mentioned earlier, contains the right for people to obtain the protection of them within their person and their homes against unreasonable searches, as provided the definition from De Bruin Law in 2018. Now, Americans desire to feel safe within their homes and do not typically want law enforcement interfering with their lives. However, they want that safety from crime and terrorism. Now, the desires of Americans regarding the Fourth Amendment becomes very controversial between the two perspectives. The courts have settled cases that force the government to elaborate the laws and deem certain actions by law enforcement unconstitutional, which gives Americans a more safe-feeling environment for them, but also them feeling safe from crime and terrorism as well. Now, for some cases that have brought change to the criminal law. Now, law enforcement conducts searches upon people who they believe are suspicious or supposedly have a probable cause to search the person. Now, there was a major case that the phrase stop and frisk was debated. And as a tool of crime, it really had a really big effect on the war of drugs based in the major landmark case, Terry versus Ohio in 1968. Says Wander Believe in 2016. Now, in 1968, the Supreme Court had decided to uphold the stop and frisk policing within the Terry, Ohio case. The court had ruled that the search against Terry was reasonable and was used in a legal principle that justified the decision was the officer was protecting the police and others nearby. Since the ruling of this case, there were a cascade of other cases that had dealt with this issue of an officer conducting a reasonable search. Another major case is in 1967. This Supreme case was Katz versus the United States, and it was a major landmark case involving the Fourth Amendment. Now, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, as everyone knows as FBI, wiretapped Charles Katz. This is a phone call on a public payphone. Now, the Supreme Court had decided that evidence against Katz was inadmissible, and he believed he has a reasonable expectation of privacy when making phone calls, says Rubenstein in 2018 as he narrates the entire case. The court used that legal principle to decide that any conversation made with reasonable expectation of privacy is actually protected underneath the Fourth Amendment, and that wiretapping is actually established as a search, says as De Bruin Law in 2018 by definition. Now, the current state of law actually reflects the clear intent of the law and the originality stated within the U.S. Constitution. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Fourth Amendment protects the people from unreasonable searches, and the cases that occurred have narrowed and elaborated the interpretation of an unreasonable search. Due to the United States Supreme Court making the decision upon the Terry and Ohio case, as well as the Katz versus the United States case, the decision is implemented throughout the entire country federally. However, there were more cases that followed these two cases that dealt with the violation of a person's Fourth Amendment. In result, the Supreme Court must make decisions that narrow and establish what is considered an unreasonable search. Therefore, the law has not changed, rather improved upon the attempts to find loopholes or gray areas within the law. Now, to just bring everything together, a changing society constantly causes a changing government. And that the Supreme Court must keep elaborating the law to the public and narrow what falls underneath the law. A multitude of cases are presented to the courts, and some are brought to the United States Supreme Court, such as those two major cases, such as Terry versus Ohio and Katz versus the United States. These cases brought new actions that will help the court deem what is inadmissible during trial. The current state of law has fallen parallel with the original state of law. However, it constantly adds upon what is able to be used in court. Now, the criminal law has remained the same through landmark cases. However, they were forced to deem certain actions from the police to be an unreasonable search against a person. Now, even though these cases have helped improve the law, there is always room for improvement, no matter how improved